Okay, guys, so this is chapter 6, Michel Foucault. Okay, that's how you pronounce his name. So he was a French theorist, and he talks about lifestyles but also about discourses. So that's the conversation that we have about our lifestyle and about our identity. Okay, so discourse is basically just another way of saying a discussion or a conversation. And he was quite concerned with how institutions, and we can talk about media institutions, work to constrain certain groups. So that might be through race, ethnicity, class, and they had power over how these groups were represented and how their identity was constructed, and also limiting their opportunities to actually fight back and actually have a voice themselves. So his work changed throughout his theoretical life, but it's saying here that earlier on he took a kind of Marxist approach and was looking at how these experts, quote unquote, were stopping those other smaller minority groups from actually having a voice. So, an idea would be something like a news institution, maybe the Sun, which works to promote the voices of people who are more leaning towards Labour, and people who are union workers and the common man and the average man, and then seek to stop the elite, as they see it, having a voice in that newspaper. Similarly, there are other newspapers run by what we would call the elite, for example, the government. They also have institutions that stop minority groups from having a voice. So that's what he was concerned with. He's given the example here of psychiatrists from the 17th century, who put a lot of people in asylums who they claimed were mad but actually weren't. But because they were seen as experts, psychiatry was revered as, or is still revered, as a profession, much like doctors, and especially in the media. If you think about powerful institutions, for example, Disney has worked to, in the original guise that they were, to represent women in a certain way. If you look at Snow White, Cinderella, they were very subservient. They had a lot of power over how those women, the identity of those women was constructed. It's changed a bit more now, but they're like an authority, in the film industry. So that's what he was talking about. And then later, he was talking about institutions having not less power, but actually how we've been affected, and we actually police ourselves. It's called self-regulation. So it's similar to what the Nazis did in their concentration camps. They put the prisoners in charge of each other. So they were so worked up and scared and wanted, some power just to feel human again, that they would police the other prisoners, and grass on them, or, whatever they did. So it's not dissimilar to what happens in the media. What Foucault is saying is that we're so controlled, that we're actually doing it ourselves. We don't need anyone to control us because we do it perfectly well, because we're so ingrained with these ideas of how to fit into society. It goes on to talk about advertising, and it's really interesting when you look at the range of advertising that we have to regulate or, police ourselves. So not just in terms of hygiene, in terms of our aspirations, our goals, how we see ourselves and our identity, hair colour, clothing. How do I create myself to be a functioning person in society, and how do I make sure that I'm a functioning, contributing member. Something like Jeremy Kyle, for example, you could take the view that people who watch Jeremy Kyle see the consequences of people who don't police themselves, people who have no, in Jeremy Kyle's eyes, for example, have no morals, don't contribute to society. So there's the consequence. And we've spoken before about threats and rewards. So the threat there is, if you don't get a job, don't go to uni, don't live a good lifestyle, you'll end up in Jeremy Kyle. So it's about that conversation about how media influences to actually regulate ourselves.